last but not least, we're going to tie up all the things that we talked about in the mining industry with Foundry Digital CEO Michael Colyer, and who's going to be in conversation with Nolan Bauerle.
Welcome, 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 everyone. You've heard, we've been here and we've heard a lot today already about this historic event of migrating hash power. And you've heard a lot about how the trend went and a lot of the details. So I want to cover something a little different. We've got Mike Colyer, who really is at the bird's eye view of all of this. I mean, he saw one of the most incredible migrations of industry and technology ever happen, probably in the history of the world, the unique mobilization and coordination of all this. And now I want to start with taking it a different way. There's this kind of idea out there, I think a lot of people can recognize it, that Chinese state apparatus, corporate entities stole a lot of IP innovation from American companies, and you hear about that all the time. I'm not here to prove it or not. There's a general consensus that this happened, and it's sort of widely held. And I wonder if in 5 or 10 years what we saw just happen with this migration, if it was such a huge loss that it can actually flip that idea 180, so that in history we remember that it was in fact America who was the big thief of innovation and technology and an entire industry. Thief is probably the wrong word. It was a mistake, and China, of course, let it go. But was it such a big mistake that it would, in historical perspective, switch what we think is the relationship between the flow of industry and information today?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to frame it. I think China made a big policy mistake with banning mining. They had threatened it for years, but they actually pushed through with significant reduction in hash rate. Not all of it. Mm-hmm. I kind of characterize it as a nation-state attack to the Bitcoin network, mm-hmm. right? They had 65, 70% of the hash rate at one point. Here comes a nation-state saying, we don't want this. And the question was, what was going to happen to Bitcoin? And I think the more fascinating part of this is the fact that Bitcoin's still here. It's stronger than ever. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest countries in the world tried to shut it down. Mm-hmm. Even within China, there's still 10 to 15% of the hash rate still there.
Which is impervious, I guess, to the dictates, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to stomp out Bitcoin miners.
So, I mean, it's essentially that then. If we are talking about how we'll remember this in history, if the industry itself is so large and the effect on, if we're talking about money and our visions of Bitcoin happen.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is China dominated the Bitcoin mining space, right? Bitmain was able to come out with a really amazing ASIC machine early on. Mm-hmm. They were able to scale it. They built a lot of machines. They sold it to their friends and customers within China, so the Chinese miners got a hold of those machines first. They got the hash power. They built the pools, so they had all of the top 10, or most of the top 5 pools were all Chinese pools. Mm-hmm. Really had a stranglehold on the industry. And through the last bull market, 2017-18, the US started to wake up to the opportunity around mining. So there was a lot of people that started investing, a lot of great companies, and were prepping. And then the bear market happened, right? And the companies that were able to build through that bear market were well positioned for the next bull run. And then China, which caught everybody off guard, said, mm-hmm. no more mining. Mm-hmm. And all that hash rate started shifting to the United States. And it's fascinating. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, because I want to, you mentioned the pools, and I'm reminded of the Steve Jobs quote that he used to get giddy about when he stole the mouse from Xerox, and he said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And we saw those pools. That was an actual financial innovation. right? That was something that didn't exist in Wall Street or didn't exist in the financial infrastructure around Bitcoin in the early days. And there was a bit of envy or looking over to China and seeing these pools operate and wondering like, it's not really a thing we can do because it's over there. That itself, that financial product, bringing the mining pools here, is another one of those examples.
Yeah, so at Foundry, we're part of the DCG portfolio, and when we started Foundry, Barry Silbert said, look at leverage DCG's balance sheet, our brand, let's help build out the North American mining space. And when we looked at the landscape, one thing we said was they need financing, so let's provide financing to miners because they were cash poor at the time. We mine ourselves, but then we took a step back and said, these large publicly traded companies, it's difficult to mine into a Chinese pool because it's like a black box. You don't know if you're really getting what you're supposed to be getting back out. And we said, let's build a transparent, trusted pool layer software for the North American market. And it's been a wild ride. And we were just hoping to be a top 5 pool. We felt like if you couldn't get into the top 5, you wouldn't survive. And in less than 12 months, we became the #1 pool in the world. And nobody's ever done that outside of China, right? So we're kind of learning how this goes, and it's been an amazing journey.
Well, it certainly didn't appear safe for business, what was going on the pools over there. When you bring in here, truthfully, you are removing a type of counterparty risk to a financial relationship, even though it's with machines and.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for many years, because the Chinese had kind of a monopoly around that, they charged really high fees to the miners. Mm-hmm. It started getting a little more competitive. They've kind of driven that fees down to 0, so it becomes a more efficient market.
So this stuff, flooded into the country, and it was, where do you put them? And we have to find places to plug them in. Who has capacity to plug these machines? These machines want to fly over. We're going to fly them. We've got planes. Where do they go? And if you go back to that 2013 when I was a hobby miner and 14, there was I don't know what percentage, there was a nice healthy percentage provided by, let's say, sentimental Bitcoin people. Like, we really want to see this, we love it, let's go. When this thrust came, all these machines and demand, where can we plug them in? I want to talk about the effect on the US energy industry. Did it take sentimental people inside companies to get it done? Or like a champion, I'm a Bitcoin champion, or was it just a bottom line thing and they said, cool, Bitcoin, whatever, I'm going to make a bit of money, dollars, I guess, let's go do this.
So I think one of the things that folks don't understand about Bitcoin mining is the algorithm is written in such a way that the miners are naturally incentivized to find the lowest cost. Right? And energy is a huge component of Bitcoin mining. So miners are constantly looking for the lowest cost energy. Lowest cost energy tends to be renewable, right? So the first place they go is hydro. Hydro's been, for 100 years, been a very reliable source of low cost energy.
As long as gravity's constant.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be holding up.
So far.
So miners naturally go find the low cost energy, and they did that in China. And they're doing it in the US, right? So you find places where there's hydro, there's lots of miners. There's been enormous amounts of wind and solar production built in West Texas. That's why miners are going down there. And they'll continue to do that. Miners will continue to, they're very mobile, and they're going to search for the lowest cost energy. And they also drive the production of lowest cost energy, right? So it's an incentive now for these renewable companies to engage with miners because they can help finance the renewable projects. So it's one of my favorite stories is I was in Oklahoma with some Chinese miners that were building out a mining site in Oklahoma, and it's just fun to hear their stories and how they're trying to deal with American regulation and,
The regulation piece is interesting because we see multiple experiments in America. There is no probably answer for these folks. How do you deal with it in America? Well, where in America, right? This isn't centralized control over the energy system. We're in a state right now that has energy independence. We see what happened in New York, right? Another part of the federation that did something else.
Don't get me started.
Well, is there? But is there an advantage in this federal way? Like, is it okay to be taking experiments? I mean, we have to keep our mind open that being wrong is not necessarily it. There might be ways we didn't anticipate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying New York has it right. I'm not arguing for New York, right?
So, looking at America, I think we embrace innovation. We embrace technology. We experiment. We push the limits on everything, right? And we've got this, I think, really unique system that encourages that. So you do get this competition between the states. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. You know, I think New York is fundamentally making a mistake. Does the Bitcoin network care? Actually, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. You know, Bitcoin is an opt-in system. You have to opt into it. Right now, New York is opting out. So China opted out, right? And what's the long-term ramifications for China opting out of this new financial system that's being built? And I think New York got to be thinking about that too. If all the other states start adopting it, where's that going to leave New York? They're going to fall further and further behind.
Can you just explain exactly what happened in New York? Because there's so many different messages, right? There's some that say it's a big deal, not a big deal. I haven't had time. The event started just before. Explain it to me just quickly to understand. Just give me your opinion on what happened.
Yeah, so there was a power plant in New York, Greenwich, that I'm going to call it a peaker plant. It's a gas-fired plant that the grid needs for a few times a day. And they were struggling to make money to keep the plant up. So if the plant goes down, you're going to end up over time getting rolling brownouts in Western New York, right? So they discovered Bitcoin 3-4 years ago and said, hey, wait a minute, if we have this base load, we can run our power plant more efficiently, we can service the grid better, and we can actually make money. So the environmental community is like, oh, we don't want gas-fired plants anymore. This is bad for the environment. You guys are going to, you know, boil the oceans. So they put a big focus on shutting them down. And instead of shutting them down, they introduced a bill to, I call it, ban mining in New York, which is basically the signal that they've sent to the world that we're not welcome to your industry. And through the whole political process, they grandfathered in the Greenwich plant. So their original intent is not even being accomplished. So I would suggest, like, look, if New York does not want any more gas-fired plants or coal-fired plants, they should introduce legislation that doesn't allow any industry to use those. Why target just mining? Well, this becomes a really slippery slope. Yeah, like when the legislators are deciding whether you get to use electricity or not, if I'm a business right now in New York, I'm super nervous that they're going to target my industry next.
Like they're making choices about what deserves energy and what doesn't. Yeah. What's worth it?
What's worth it?
Yeah. Now
it starts to spiral out of control for New York.
It makes me think of this. You know, you got DeSantis in Florida. We hear about it in all the other panels here about Bitcoin, financial literacy. You hear it, if you've been in other panels, I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. Financial literacy, financial literacy. True, we need a lot of it. Florida passed that bill saying if you don't graduate from high school without some financial literacy education, you can't graduate, right? I wonder if we're actually talking about a deficiency in, let's call it energy literacy. I think there must be such a thing as energy literacy. If people can't understand that what's going on in New York makes no sense at all, either for the grid or economically or for the environment, is it really just a problem that these people are so illiterate, also known as stupid? Is that really what's going on?
No, I wouldn't. So I wouldn't go that far because, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have put myself in the same category, right? So as I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I think it was 5 years ago this month.
5 years ago. Did not get all this done in 5 months.
Sorry, 5 years ago, I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And over the last 5 years, I have had to do research on so many subjects that I was really ignorant on. Like, I just didn't understand. Even the electrical grid. Like, I don't know if I really understood the intricacies of it. We've had to study this now and go very deep on how electricity works, right? And this idea that the grid always has to be balanced. So as you add renewable energy, which we want, I think everybody wants that, you have this intermittent source of power coming, and you need an intermittent load to balance it, right? And I think that's one of the greatest inventions of the Bitcoin algorithm, is this idea that it's given this new technology to our electrical grid to help balance it and help us transition to a renewable future. So it's actually the solution, and people don't recognize it. The problem is you have to do your own research. Like, you have to spend your time. They just read the headlines. You know, in the newspapers, you guys, that you love these articles that like catch everyone's eyes and it's clickbait. And unless you kind of peel back and start doing your own research, you can get suckered by some of these.
Yeah, and now when I reflect even on myself, like, you know, I say this to people all the time. I was a lawyer, I worked for the Senate Banking Committee, and before I understood Bitcoin, I was financially illiterate.
Yeah.
I didn't understand a thing.
Yeah.
Like nothing. You know what I mean? And I think the same thing goes today, where someone could be an expert in environmental law, or in environmentalism, or an expert in, you know, green energy, but still be energy illiterate. What do we do to stop energy illiteracy?
So, I think that's a great concept, and probably one we'll run with, is this idea that people need to understand how important energy is to what we do. Everything we do comes from energy, right? So you can't, this narrative that, you know, like, that we got to shut down all the coal plants and fossil fuel plants, it's not possible today. Someday it might be, but if you do it too fast, you're in trouble. Look at, they shut down all the nuclear plants in Germany, and look what the Russians are doing now. Like, oops, what a big mistake, right? I don't want New York to make the same mistake. That's why we're advocating so hard against this, is we don't want them to make the same mistake. And what they're missing is the second order effects of that decision. The biggest renewable energy companies in the world are literally calling us, they're calling other miners saying, teach us about Bitcoin mining. We're going to teach you about the grid. We want to marry this up. Bitcoin mining will help fund renewable production. Would you invest $100 million in New York with this moratorium that they have? No way, you wouldn't touch it. Why would you invest there when you can build wind farms in other states where you're not worried about them shutting you down because you're co-locating with Bitcoin mining? So I think 3-4 years from now, all of a sudden New York's going to be like, why don't we have more solar? Why don't we have more wind? And the energy companies are like, because they can make more money in Texas and Oklahoma and other states. It's really scary.
Yeah, well, but I think there might be an opening for you know, after some of the ill effects are felt, because we see now, I've heard of a lot of VCs here and all that saying, I'm not investing in places with wind because I now anticipate brownouts. If you went that far in wind and you're talking about turning off a coal thing, well, I just don't believe in it in 5 years. So in the end, they might really need you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They might really need you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, you know, we heard Jack Dorsey and Jay-Z mention the other day that they were going to set up a financial literacy thing in Marcy houses. I used to live right by there. I'm going to try and volunteer and help out. And that's my whole neighborhood in Brooklyn. What can we do, man? How do you get kids mining?
Yeah, so we started a program. We call it Rock the Block. We're up in Rochester, New York. Shout out to you guys there. They're in the crowd.
Where are these kids? There they are.
So, you know, I got into Bitcoin because it levels the playing field. It redistributes wealth. It's decentralized. Anybody can participate. And we stepped back 6 months ago and said, there's an entire community that's not participating in the mining. And that was our inner city. And we said, how do we bring mining to the inner city? And we went out, we've hired 7 amazing employees to come on board, recent graduates of the Rochester City School District. They haven't made it to college yet, and we've brought them in and we said, we're going to teach you mining, we're going to teach you about Bitcoin, we're going to teach you about the crypto ecosystem. Some of them never left the city of Rochester before, right? And they're here in Austin in this amazing event you guys have put on.
Better than college.
Better than college. It's way better than college. You kidding? And they're learning and they're absorbing. And I think that the potential for them to take their learnings back into their community, and for me, I think Bitcoin crypto is going to allow those communities to build their own financial systems, and they can thrive within their communities. And I'm super excited about it. It's a big experiment. We're going to do everything we can to support them, but it's been fun. I mean, Foundry's, we've been growing like crazy. This is the part in New York, we're up to 170 employees in Rochester, New York.
Beautiful.
20% of all Bitcoin mined flows through our software in Western New York. When was the last time that happened in Western New York? And I've got representatives in our Senate, in our Assembly, that basically are saying, we don't care about your jobs. I'm like, how do I go back to my team and say,
well,
our own state doesn't want us?
You might have to just do it yourself, and by that I mean, we've spoken many times. I spoke with you, I remember, when you just started Foundry at a Christmas party, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you then, because I've been thinking about it since then. I'm a big fan of the small modular nuclear reactors, and we hear about Rolls-Royce making some, and they say, we're looking for buyers, cities and states, and these people who are treating you so bad, clearly energy illiterate people, maybe they're not going to have enough money to buy it because they made poor choices. When are we financing the purchase of our own energy source, and when will a Bitcoin miner own a nuclear reactor themselves?
Wow, I don't think it's far away. What we're seeing is, I think the next round, you go back 5 years, if you deployed $5 million into this space, you were a big miner. This cycle, it was 500 million. The next cycle is going to be billions of dollars.
I'm told they're 2 billion.
Right?
I'm told.
Yeah. So I think the next wave, there's going to be two things are going to happen. One, the big energy companies are going to actually be miners themselves, using this to stabilize grids. I think there's going to be lots of major investors that are going to say, let's put up nuclear, and let's co-locate Bitcoin mining to help subsidize that, get it off the ground, and then we can support the grid. Like, it's going to play out this way. 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about it. It's literally happening now. So I think it's only a matter of time. I mean, the technology that's happened on the nuclear side over the last 30 years is incredible. And back to this energy, this idea of being energy literate, I think we have to educate citizens of the United States of how important this is. And it's super safe technology, and it's going to give us all a better future.
Well, better future, but unfortunately, our time here is done. So, please, a warm round of applause for Mike Colyer.
Thank you.